I had the dock lights up 2 hours before anyone else was awake, because that was the job, and because I did not sleep well the night before a muster anymore. 30 years running a berth crew at Solmere Reach will do that to a man. You learn the rhythms of a station the way you learn the rhythms of your own heart, and you learn when something in it has gone quiet that shouldn't have. The remembrance muster was always held in the long hall, the one place on the Reach where the ceiling glass ran clear from wall to wall and let the system's morning light pour down across the honor roll without a single shadow to hide in. It was meant that way. Nothing spoken under that glass could be taken back once it was said. I was checking manifest seals in the archive concourse when I heard Palatine Doran Kesh telling her, gently, the way a man tells someone something he has already decided is kind. There is no dishonor in stepping back, Majesty. The role only has so many names it can hold with dignity. Yalia's ascension needs the room. I did not see her face. I did not need to. I had spent enough hours across a comm channel from that voice, decades ago, to know exactly what silence like that costs a person who has never once, in my hearing, asked anyone for anything. Of course, she said, see that it's done properly. That was all. No argument. Rasa Ilith Solen did not argue for herself. She never had. I want to tell you what she looked like the day I first served under her, because it matters to what happened after. I was 22, a liaison rating on temporary posting to the Solen flagship during the Ash Crown relief, the kind of young that thinks competence is the same thing as worth. She was the war queen of the Third Fleet, dove-gray skin lit faintly along old scar lines, copper hair cropped short for a war she was still fighting, storm blue eyes that missed nothing a junior rating did right or wrong. She corrected my second report herself, in front of her staff, and then had the decency to tell me afterward that I'd have made a fine officer in another life. I have carried that sentence for 30 years, the way other men carry medals. There was a night, near the relief's end, when the two of us were the only ones left awake on the flag bridge, and she told me, quietly, not as a queen, just as a person too tired to keep the difference straight, that she had never met a subordinate whose reports she trusted the way she trusted mine. I remember the shape of that bridge better than I remember most rooms I've stood in since, the long viewport dark with the relief convoy's running lights strung out like a chain of small, stubborn stars, and her, still in her deck armor, boots up on the rail, talking to me like I was worth the trouble of talking to at all. I told her I'd have followed her into vacuum without a suit. She laughed, the real kind, low and surprised at herself, and for one unwise hour, neither of us pretended that what sat between us was only rank. I remember, too, the morning after, when the relief ships finally cleared the horizon 11 days late, and half her crew wept from hunger and relief in the same breath. She stood at the airlock and greeted every one of them by name before she let herself eat. I was 22, and I decided, standing there watching her do that I had never seen dignity look like anything else since. Galactic succession law ended it before it began. A sovereign of the Solen cannot bind herself to an unranked foreign national, not while the succession stands unsettled, and hers did. She sent me home with a commendation, and a silence that told me everything the commendation couldn't. I mustered out. I came to Solmere Reach to run dock crews because it was as far from a flagship as I could get and still smell recycled air the same way. I never told anyone who I'd served under. I kept one thing, a liaison rating ribbon, teal and frayed now to gray, folded in a drawer under my bunk for 30 years. I told myself it was just a habit, the kind old spacers keep. I knew better. The muster began at midday, under that clear glass, the way it always did. Rows of veterans in their pressed gray, family, station crew given the morning off to stand and listen. Kesh read the honor roll in his even, careful voice. Names of the dead, names of the living, who'd earned the standing to be named among them. I watched him move past the letter where hers should have sat. He did it smoothly. He did it like a man who had rehearsed the smoothness. She stood in the second row, not the first, in a plain gray mantle, instead of the war colors I remembered, and she did not flinch. That was the worst part. 30 years of not flinching had made her very, very good at it. Beside her stood a young woman, with the same storm blue eyes, and none of the scars yet. Yali, the heir, dressed for a ceremony that hadn't started, looking anywhere but at the woman who'd raised her to stand exactly there. I don't know exactly what happened in me in that half second. I have thought about it since, and I still can't give you a cleaner answer than this. I had spent 30 years being a man who kept quiet things folded away, where they couldn't cost anyone anything, and I found I did not want to be that man for one more minute. I stood up. The hall does that thing halls do when someone breaks the pattern. A held breath, 100 faces turning. Kesh stopped reading. I felt every ounce of the fool I probably looked like, and I spoke anyway. Rasa Ilith Solen, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. War Queen Emerita of the Third Fleet. She held the Ash Crown relief line 11 days past when the relief ships were supposed to arrive. On rations she split evenly with junior crew, before she took her own share. I was there. I watched her do it. She earned this role before I was old enough to understand what earning meant, and no ascension needs her erased to make its room. Nobody moved for a moment that felt like it had no bottom to it. Then an old veteran 3 rows up, gray-haired, a Third Fleet pin still on his collar after all these years, said her name back, quiet, like a man remembering something he'd let himself forget he was allowed to say. Then another voice took it up. Then it wasn't a few voices anymore, it was the hall, her name moving through the rows the way water finds its way downhill, unstoppable once it starts, until Kesh stood there, holding his ledger with nothing left in his hands worth arguing. I looked at her then. I made myself do it, because I owed her 30 years of not looking. She was not crying. I want to be honest about that, because that was never her way, not once in all the years I'd known her. But her eyes were wet and full, and locked on mine across that hall, like no time at all had passed since the flag bridge, like she was only now allowing herself to recognize the shape of the young man she'd sent away, for the sake of a law neither of us had ever stopped resenting. Ezra Colmum, she said, and the whole hall heard my name the way I'd just made them hear hers. You kept the ribbon. I kept the ribbon, I said. Kesh found his voice enough to say something about protocol and the Ascension timeline, and one of her own old officers, a woman I didn't know, silver-haired, Third Fleet insignia bright and unfaded, told him, not unkindly, that protocol had just been read to him by the hall itself, and perhaps he should let it stand. They restored her name to the roll before the muster closed, not as a courtesy, as a correction. The heir's ascension proceeded 3 days later, with Rasa Ilith Solen, seated in the first row where she belonged, in her old war colors, and nobody in that court ever again suggested there wasn't room. She found me afterward on the concourse, in the ordinary daylight, away from all the ceremony. She didn't say anything grand. She reached out and closed her hand over the drawer-worn ribbon I still had folded in my palm, the way she used to close a hand over a report she trusted without needing to reread it. 30 years, she said, and you never once told anyone. Didn't need to, I said. I only needed to remember it myself. Then remember this too, she said, and there was nothing left composed in her voice, only the plain truth of it. I never stopped either. That was 31 years ago next spring. She still runs her fleet, though she lets the younger officers do the shouting now. I still run the docks. We are neither of us young, and neither of us, not once since that muster, has had to pretend that what sits between us is only rank.